Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom and welcome to today's Daf Yomi Niddah Daf Membeis. We're starting around 8 lines from the top. Daf Yomi Niddah Rav Shmuel bar Brisna me Abaye. Rav Shmuel bar Brisna asked a question of Abaye. Piletes shichva zera. What is the status of a isha who emits shichva zera? We've discussed earlier. There's a tumas piletes when a isha expels zera that she received from a ish. She's tamei on that day only until she's tovel and has hair of shemesh, meaning until nightfall. The question remains, however, what is the geder? What is the exact definition of this tumah? Is it considered like her own personal tumah, as if she had generated this tumah, similar to an isha who sees dam, etc.? Or perhaps is it simply as if she had come into contact with a davar tami, as though she had touched the sheretz, etc.? And there are 3 halachic ramifications. There are 3 nafkaminas between this approach and this approach. Nafkamina, the Gemara continues, listar ulatame b'mashu ulatame b'fnim kibachutz. There are 3 nafkaminas. Number 1 is listar. We know that a zav or a zava who had seen dam during the yimei ziva, and now they are required to count 7 clean days, shivas yamim nekiyim. In those 7 days, they have to be completely free of any re'iyos of dam and of zaif. However, if there is any re'iyah, they cancel the set of days, even though they had already counted some, and they have to count all over again. Now, this halacha is strictly by re'iyah, by a self-generated tumah. However, if a zava or a zava during their shiva yemenikim would come into contact with a sheret, say, of course there would be no din of stira. The question is whether a pileta shichva zera, do we consider it as if it's a re'iyah, and then it would cancel her shiva yemenikim? Or perhaps it is simply a tumas maga, and in that case there would be no din of stira. That is the first nafkamina. The second nafkamina would be l'tami b'mashu. How much is needed? What is the amount of zera that is needed to mimtami her? If it's a tumas maga, you would require a certain amount of ka'adasha, so to for example, like a sheretz, the din of tumas maga requires a certain amount of tumah. However, if it's a tumas re'iyah, we've learned in the Mishnah, even a mashu, even a minute amount, is metami her. The third nafkamin is l'tami b'fnim kibachutz. We know that a isha is tamei tumas niddah, even if the dam had not exited completely, had it just come from the rechem into the bayis achitzin, into the external chamber, as we discussed in yesterday's daf. And therefore, similarly, by zera, by pleta zera, if the zera had been expelled just into the external chamber, if it's considered a re'iyah, that would be sufficient to mitame her. However, if it is mitzad tumas maga, if it is because she came into contact, then we know that the bayis achitzin, the external chamber of the isha, is still considered a concealed place. It is beis hastarim, which is not mitame b'maga. She cannot come into contact and become tamei in that area. And therefore, in the case of piletes, there would be no tumah. So again, we have a question regarding piletes. Is it tumas re'iyah? Is it a self-generated tumah, or is it merely a tumas maga because of coming to contact with the davar tamid? There are 3 nafkaminas. One is the question of canceling the yimei sfira of a zav. Number 2, how much is necessary? Number 3, whether you are required to have the zera exit the body completely, or is it sufficient to have arrived into the bayis achitzin, similar to a re'iyah of dam nida? Zokti Marvait. Manavshach. What approach are you taking? How do you explain your question? Ishmi masnisin. We've just had a whole brisa discussing this very question. There was a shaila between Rab Shimon and the Rabbanon, whether Pileta zera needs to have the zera expelled completely from her guf, according to Rab Shimon. And according to the Rabbanon, it is sufficient for her to have reached the bayis achitzin to be metame the isha. Apparently, their machlekes is based on this shaila. So, practically speaking, the shaila is dependent on the Tanoim. Rab Shimon would hold it is a tumas maga, and therefore needs to exit the guf completely. And the Rabbanon hold it as tumas re'iyah. Ishmael masnisin, if he was informed of the Mishnah, the Rabbanon roya havya. According to the Rabbanon, she is a roya. The Rab Shimon negayas havya. According to Rab Shimon, she is a negas. V'lo Ishmael masnisin, if he wasn't aware of this Mishnah or Brisa, mischaver negayas havya. it is reasonable, it is logical to think that a piletes, since it is not coming from an internal source, rather it's something she had received externally, why would you entertain that it is considered a tumas re'iyah and equated with dam ziva or dam niddah? It is logical to assume that it is merely a negeya and no more than that. So how do you explain the inquiry of Rav Shmuel Risna from Abaye? And for the Gemara, la'olam, actually Shmuel Masnissen, he knows, he was aware of the Mishnah, of the Brisa. V'aliba de Rabbanan loikim e'barele. His question wasn't based on the Rabbanan. It was pretty obvious that the Rabbanan hold that the piletes has a din of a roya, and therefore it's metame b'fnim. Kikam e'barele, his question was only based aliba de Rav Shimon, according to Rav Shimon's view. Rav Shimon holds that the isha will only be tamei by piletes if the zera had exited the guf completely. The question remains, however, is that because Rav Shimon holds that a piletes is a negas, and therefore, regarding the other nafkaminas, for instance, stira, there will be no cancellation of the shivin nikiyim. Regarding the amount, you would have to have a specific amount. Would you say so? Or perhaps even Rav Shimon agrees to the Rabbanan in the underlying reason, in the underlying basis for the tumah, that is merely that it is a tumas re'iyah. However, Rav Shimon is only disputing in regard to a specific point. He holds that dayo keboyala, you cannot be matame the isha in a different manner than the ish who the zera had originated from. You have to equate the tumas isha to the tumas ish, just like by the ish you require the zera to actually leave the body, so too by the isha there will be no tumah until it actually comes out completely. Yes, it is a tumas re'iyah, but this tumas re'iyah needs to be with the same parameters as a tumas re'iyah of the ish. So let's see inside. His question was regarding the shitas Reb Shimon. I'll leave it Reb Shimon, according to Reb Shimon. He had no question regarding the issue of mifnim b'achutz. That's pretty clear that Reb Shimon requires that it should actually leave the guf. His question was only listar regarding the halacha of canceling the shiva yinakiyim, and whether it is metame even with a minute amount. Meaning, perhaps Reb Shimon agrees in concept to the Rabbanan that a pileta shechazera is a raya. It is only regarding the halacha of a tame b'fnim kibachutz that he disagrees. What is the conclusion? Kika amar Reb Shimon daya keboyala. Perhaps Reb Shimon, who holds that we equate the isha to the boyal to the ish, that is only hanimil. That is only said letzmuyi b'fnim kibachutz, only regarding the halacha of b'fnim kibachutz. It could only be matama the isha in the same manner as the ish, and therefore you cannot be matami her, even if it's a roya. You cannot be matami her as you would be matami by dam nida, but rather you have to wait until the tumah leaves the guf. Ava lister latami bekolshu, regarding the other ramifications, of course roya havya. She's considered a full-fledged roya, and therefore will be seiser the nikiyim, will be matami even bekolshu. So that is one side of the equation. Idilma, perhaps you would say loishna. There's no difference between the three things, meaning that just as we find that Reb Shimon holds that the zera has to actually leave the guf, and that would seem to indicate that it is a tumas maga, therefore there needs to be an exiting and a contact, an external contact. So too regarding the other two halachas, Reb Shimon will hold that piletes is in the category of negas and not of roya. So that's the first version in explaining the inquiry of Rav Shmuel Bisna from Abaye. What is the gather? What is the parameters of a piletes shechvazera? Is she a roya or a negas? According to the Rabbanan, there's no question she is a roya, and will be seiser shivnikim, requires only a mashuhu, and is tamei bifnim kim bachutz, and need not leave the guf. The question remains, according to Reb Shimon, who equates the isha to the ish regarding that the zera is only metame once it leaves the guf, and that would indicate somehow a connection to tumas, to the concept of tumas maga. Perhaps that is strictly regarding that detail, but regarding the other halachas of being seiser and kolshu, Reb Shimon agrees that she is in essence a roya, meaning she is a Raya with certain restrictions, because we equate the Isha's Riyah to the Isha's Riyah, or perhaps that would imply that Reb Shimon holds completely different than the Rabbanan in the underlying rationale behind the halacha of Piletes. Shimon holds that she's a Negas, and therefore would not be Seiser the Yimei Ziva, requires a shear of a Negia, a Koshu is not sufficient, and therefore is only Matami once the Tumah actually leaves the Guf. So that is the first way, the first approach in the Shaila of the Gemara. Ikad Amr, there's another approach. La'olam lo yishmi alei. Really, he never heard, he wasn't aware of the Braisa, Masnisa, v'achikim ebayel, and therefore he had his inquiry. What is a Shaila? Mida'ach mirachmana abali keryan. B'sinai, he was inquiring merely from his own logic. It wasn't based on a Braisa. He was merely asking a question because of the svara that he had, the logic that he had, which was to compare, perhaps do we compare the Bali Karyan to the Piletes, meaning, just as we find by Matan Torah, the Torah was very stringent with Bali Karyan, with the Ish that was Moitzi Zera, so too an Isha who is a Piletes Zera will require a very stringent level of Tumah, beyond just merely a Negea. Let's see inside. Mid'ach mir Rachmana. Since the Torah was machmer, it was very stringent, Abali Keren B'Sinai, was very machmer by Matan Torah, and required the Bali Keri to distance himself, to prepare themselves for Matan Torah and be clean and pure of the Tumas Keri. And therefore, we see that implies that this type of Tumah is in a category of its own, and thus the Isha is on a very high level of Tumah. Roya Havya, it is equated to Tumas Niddah, etc. It is not just an Egeya, but a higher level of Tumah, and therefore will have all the stringency of a Roya, will be Seiser Shivanakim, will be Tami even Bekolshu, and Mibifnim Kibachutz. Dilma perhaps Loi Gamrina Misinai. We can't derive it from Sinai. Why is that? Because in Sinai we find something very interesting, which doesn't really conform with the general guidelines of Tumah. What is that? The Chidashu. It is sort of a Chidash anomaly. The Hazavim and Mitzrayim, the Chamiri. We know that actually Zavim and Mitzrayim are on a much higher level of Tumah. They require Shivan, they're Tumah for 7 days or 8 days in the Mitzrayim's case. So L'chaira, it would seem that they are even more stringent than Bali Kerim. But Le'achmu Rachmana, we find that the Torah by Sinai was not machmer, did not command that the Zavim Tzaraim have to prepare themselves and clean themselves of their Tumah. So evidently, it is a special scenario. Matan Torah was a special circumstance which was limited for Bali Keri, meaning that the Torah had a special kpeda, a specific reason why Bali Keri were commanded to prepare themselves and cleanse themselves from their Tumah, but it's not necessarily an indication of the overall universal stringency that Bali Keren have over everything else, and therefore you can't learn from Sinai to everywhere else, and you would not have any proof that a Piletes Zera is considered on a higher level Tumah as if she would be a Roya. So that's the crux of the Shaila, of the inquiry of Rosh Shmuel Rabisna. Again, a Piletes Shechazera, is she a Negas or is she a Roya, with 3 halachic ramifications. We have 2 versions in the Gemara to explain his Shaila. Number 1, he was aware of the Braisa, meaning the Machlekes Reb Shimon and Rabbanon regarding Piletes, whether she's Matame Bifnim Kibachutz, according to Tanakama, or Reb Shimon who holds that she's only Matame Bachutz. The question was, granted, according to Rabbanon, she's obviously a Roya, and therefore the Piletes Zera has the same din as a Roya Dam, and she's Matame as soon as it gets to the Bayis HaChitzai. The question remains, according to Reb Shimon, did Reb Shimon mean to say to the extent that she's only an Ageya and therefore will not have the stringency of a Roya at all? Or was it specifically focused on the halacha of Mefnim Kimachutz, although she is a Roya, but she is a Roya with the same din as the Ish? That is the first version of the Gemara. The second approach of the Gemara is, he was not aware of the Braisa, of the Machlekes between Reb Shimon and Rabbanan. It was merely a logical build-up. Do we derive from Sinai, just like we find there Balikarian, who were Moitzi Zera, were distanced from Sinai, so to the Isha it will be considered on a high level of Tumah, because we find that this Tumah carries a special stringency and she's considered as if she was Roya. Or else do we say, no, Sinai is not an indication because it was a Chiddush, and therefore we go back to plain logic, which says a Peleta Zera, being that it's not coming from herself, it's not an internal phenomenon, therefore it is merely as if she had come into contact with any Davar Tameh and does not have the din of a Roya. So this was the question posed to Abaye. Amalei Abaye responded, Roya Havya. Certainly she is as if she saw Tumah on her own, and it is equated to Dam Niddah with all its halachic ramifications. Also, Shaili l'Rava, Shmuel Bar Bisna went on to ask others the same Shaila. He asked Rava, Amalei responded the same thing, Roya Havya, she's a Roya. Also, Kamei Rabbi Yosef. He went on to Rabbi Yosef, Amalei the same thing, Roya Havya. So everybody repeated the same thing and didn't exactly prove it or explain it, and he was a little bit frustrated. Other Asa, the Kamed Abaye, he returned to Abaye, Amalei, he told him, Kulchu, all of you, Baruka Chada, with one spit of Hisu. You're all spitting one spit, meaning it's as if you have heard a halacha and you're simply spitting it out without providing proof or explanation. What is the reason behind constituting her a roya? Why would that make sense? Amalei Abaye told him, Shapr Amlach. They all said fine and well. It is true, it makes sense. You know why? And he went ahead and presented the machlekes of Reb Shimon Rabbanan to him and said like this. We know there's a machlekes of Reb Shimon Rabbanan regarding Pilates, but you should know, not only the Rabbanan hold that she is a roya, even Reb Shimon will hold that in reality she's a roya. It's just that he equates the din of Re'iyah of the Isha to the din in Re'iyah of the Ish. Ad kan, like Reb Shimon, Reb Shimon only says his halacha daya kaboila that we equate her to the ish. Ela latami b'fnim b'chutz. Only regarding this detail that she could only be matami b'chutz, similar to the tomb of the ish. However, even Reb Shimon agrees that she's considered a roya. Aval lister latami b'kolshu. Regarding the other halachas, of course, she is a roya. So in conclusion, we had a question of Pilates Shechazera, whether she has the din of a negas coming into contact with the Davar Tameh and will not have the stringencies of a roya, or else she is considered a roya. It is considered like an internal tumah, as though she had seen it, as similar to Tumas Niddah and Tumas Siva. There are three halachic ramifications to this. Number one, during the May Sphere, the 7 clean days of Azava and Azava, Re'iyah of a tumah cancels those days, and here too it would cancel and she would have to start counting all over again. The second nafkamina is the amount. Only a minute amount is necessary. Number three, the zera need not exit the guf completely, as long as it reached the bayis hachitz and she's tamei, similar to the halacha of dam nida. Says the Gemara weiter. Tana Rabbanan. We've learned in a brayso, hanida v'hazava v'shemeres yom k'neged yom. A nida or a zava who's seen 3 days during the meziva, and she is considered a zava. Vashemer Shem Kineged Zayim. She's a lower level of a zava. She only saw 1 day or 2 days, and she has to count a day of free of dam in order to become tahar. Vayaledes, a isha who gave birth. All these 4 cases, kulon matamois b'fnim kibachutz. In all these cases, they are tamei as soon as the dam has reached the external chamber, past the rechem. It need not leave the guf. B'yishleimet, all is well, kulu, and the rest of the cases of nida, zava, shemeres yom, l'chai, it is all good and well. Eli yeledes, however, let's explore, what is the yeledes that we're speaking about? Ibimei nida, nida. If she's seen dam during the leda, which took place during her yemei nida, the part of the monthly cycle which is considered yemei nida, then she's a nida. Why do you have to separate, why focus on yeledes as a separate category? She's a nida like any other nida. Ibi mei ziva, if it happened during the mei ziva, then she's a ziva. So it's included in the first cases of the brayso of nida and ziva. Why go ahead and mention yeledes as a separate case? Leitzricha, it is not necessary to discuss this, only in the following case. Shiyar de litvoil metumal tahara. We mentioned earlier that an isha after childbirth has the metuma and the metara. For instance, by a nekeva, the first 2 weeks are considered Yimei Tumah, whether or not she sees any dam. Subsequently, begin the Yimei Tahara. However, there's a shita of Beis Hillel, we are following that shita in the Gemara here, that she needs to be toivel after the completion of the Yimei Tumah, and only then does she begin the Yimei Tahara. So suppose she's going to be toivel after the completion of the Yimei Tumah, and there was a presence of some dam in the Bayis HaChitzon at that point. Let's go by Tuk. V'chiha, the Amar Reb Zera. It is similar to the case of Reb Zera, Mechia bar Ashi Amarav. Yeledis, she yarda litvel mitumah tahara. Yeledis, who descended and went to be toivel after her Yimei Tumah. V'neker min adam, and there was a dislodgement of dam from the rechem to the Bayis HaChitzon prior to her tvila. B'yirida tmeya, if it happened before she was toivel, and the dam remained there, and she was toivel. Even though she was toivel, since the dam was nekar during the Yimei Tumah prior to the tefillah, the dam is metame the isha. However, ba'aliyah, if it happened post tefillah, now of course she's during the Yimei Tahara and she is tahar. So we don't have a final explanation to the brisa. We are on the first phase of providing explanation to the aforementioned brisa. What is Yeledis speaking about? When she had a presence of dam which was dislodged, which was nekar prior to her tefillah, and will still be matame the isha. I don't understand this. Why is she tame when there is dam present in the Bayis HaChitzon? Tuma bluahi. It is merely swallowed tuma. It is tuma that is swallowed within the guf of the isha. We know, as a general rule, that a tuma which is enveloped inside a person cannot be matame. It is considered obsolete. It is batal. It is nullified to the person. So in this case, where the tumah remained in the guf, it never exited the guf. It came from the Bayis HaPnimi to the Bayis HaChitzon, and now she was toivel. So it would seem to be that there's no makam, there's no reason to be matame the isha. Now we have to explain that this is different than any ordinary niddah who's tameh as soon as the dam reaches the Bayis HaChitzon. In that case, she's a tumas roya. She's tumah because she discharged the dam. And therefore, in that case, the Torah says, bibsara, she's tumah even if the dam had arrived simply to the Bayis HaChitzon and had never exited the guf. She's already considered a niddah. But in this case, however, when was the dam nekar? It was nekar during the Yimei Tahara. It was nekar during the Yimei Tumah. And she already was toivel for that. And once she goes to the mikveh and she's toivel for the Yimei Tumah, they're gone. They disappear. And now she cannot be tummy anymore for a riyah that took place during the Yimei Tumah. It is merely the presence of dam that was generated during the Yimei Tumah. It is like an object of tumah, like a sheretz, like any other tumah, that is present in her Bayis HaChitzon, and you would like to be matame her on account of that tumah. That is tumah blua. It is swallowed in the guf. It cannot be matame. Amarlei, Rav Zera responded, Zil shaili le Rav Abin. Go ask this question. It's a good question. Go ask Rav Abin. The Azris Niale, I had already explained to him. I proposed a solution to this exact question. The Karakish Libereshi, he nodded with his head in approval. He agreed to me, Bei Midrash in the Beis Medrash. Therefore, go to him. He'll explain to you in a satisfactory fashion. Azal Yimir went ahead, Shaili, he went to ask Rabbi Abin. And he told him, Amarleh, he responded, Asua kinivlas of toher. It's true, it doesn't conform with the general guidelines of Tumah. Tumah Bluya is never Matama. However, there's one exception to that rule, which is Nivlas of toher. A dead kosher bird is not Matame b'maga. If you come into contact with it, it is not Matame the person. There is only one way to become Tameh, and that is through eating, through ingesting the Nivlas of toher. And during the Achila, while it's in the throat of the person, it is Exeris HaKasev, that it is Matame the person, and also the begadim that he is wearing. So although you would seem to think that this is a tumah blua, it is inside the throat of the person, nevertheless there is an exception, and the Torah is mechadish, that is matame the person. So too in this case, the Chazal, the Chachamim, made a gzeira that the dam inside the isha is matame, similarly to what we find by nivlas iftar. Now why would we go ahead and make this gzeira? Taisus explains, because there's a gzeira, we're afraid that perhaps the dam might leave the guf and be matami her through coming into contact. So therefore the Chazal already imposed the tumah even while it is still in the guf of the isha in the makam bayis hachitzon. Again, Amar Lei, he told him, Asua, They equated the dam b'bayis hachitzon kinivlas oiftar as if it would be the nevela of an oiftar shematame b'gadim b'bayis habliya. How can you equate the two things? Over there, it is a special exception. There is no tumas maga. The only way to become tamei with a nivlas iftar is by ingesting, by eating it. So you see, apparently it is a totally different gather. It has a totally different category on its own. You can't equate it to dam nida, which is surely matame by coming into contact with a person. And therefore, why would you say, what are the grounds to be machadish, to create this brand new type of tumah belua by dam nida? Let's see inside. Hasam over there by nivlas iftar, ein la tumah machutz, there's no external tumah. And therefore, the only way to become tamei is in a narrow case of achila. Hacha, however, by dam nida kinafik leberei, as soon as it leaves the guf tamei, you can become tamei. What are the grounds, if so, for imposing a tumah while it's still tumah blua? So he disagreed with this assertion that the case of a yeledes becoming tamei with a dam that was nekar kaidun tefillah is referring to the dam that's still present in the isha. Hachanami, so he responded and said, fine, we're speaking about when the dam had left the guf, and if so, she is tamei because she came into contact with a dam that had originated in the Yimei Tumah. So the dam is actually technically dam tamei, even though the isha was taiva, but the dam had come from the Yimei Tumah. It is dam tamei, and therefore once it leaves the guf and the isha comes into contact with that tumah, with that dam, she is tamei. If that's the case, that it left the guf ma'ilem remra, why even discuss it? It's so obvious that an isha that comes into contact with something which is tamei, she is tamei. What is the point of the chiddush of Rav Zera, Rav Chiya bar Ashi, Rav, the Yeledes Yard Litfel? We're talking about a simple case of an isha coming into contact with a dam tamei, and of course she'll be tamei. So the Gemara Ma'od Tema, I would think to say this is different. Why is it different? Because let's remember, true, the dam had originated in the Yimei Tumah, but in the interim, the isha was taival. She herself personally became tahar. Perhaps just as the tvila affects tumah on the isha, so too it is mitahar anything that's included in the isha, anything that's inside the isha's guf, including the dam. Ma'alatema, I would think to say migu de mahanya, just like the tvila affects, it is mitahar ledam the ika gavoy, just as the tvila helps to be matar the isha and the dam that is inside the rechem of the isha, meaning from now on, during the Mei Tahara, any dam that leaves the isha is tahar. So too, tahani nami will also work and be matar lahai this dam that is in the bayis hachitzon. That would be the havamina. That would be the reason to think that she is completely tahar, even when the dam leaves the guf and she comes into contact. That dam was already tahar through the tefillah of the isha. Kamash Malani informs us that is not so. So we have a bona fide explanation to the chiddush of Rav Zera, the neighbor of Chiya bar Ashi Rav, the Yeledes that was Yarda Litva and Nekar Menadam B'Yirida Tmeya B'Aliyah Tahira, meaning that Yeledes, isha that gave birth, and she's completing the Yimei Tumah. She's about to go to the mikveh. At that point, there was an akira. Some dam was dislodged, but remained inside her guf. She was taivel. Now, from now on, the Mei Tahara take effect. However, the chiddush is that for this dam, since it was already nekar prior to the tefillah, the dam is dam tuma, and as soon as it leaves the guf and comes into contact with the isha, she will be tamei. But let's just point out, it is a tuma kala. It is a lenient tuma, only a tuma of tumas yaim until the hair of shemesh. It is not a 7-day tuma as though she would be a nida, because as we explained earlier, it is not the re'iyah that is being matamah her in this case, because she already was taivel from the Yimei Tumah, but rather it is simply a tumas maga from coming into contact with a davar tamei, which would impose a tumas herav shemesh. Shmait and Ifrik, we've explained the halacha. Eliyeledes, but however, let's go back to the original brisa. The brisa stated a nida, an azava, and yeledes, a matamei, b'fnim kivachutz. We had a question, why mention Yeledes? If she's seen dam during the Yomi Niddah, she's a Niddah. If it's during the Yomi Ziva, she's a Ziva. It is not a category on its own. So back to that question. Edle Yeledes, the Brisa stated the case of Yeledes. I Yomi Niddah, Niddah. I Yomi Ziva, Ziva. What is the case of the Brisa? And for the Gemara, Chevemaya Skinon was speaking about Beleida Yevesht, a dry birth, meaning there was no dam at all. And there was no tumah due to seeing any dam. But rather, because of the maisa, because of the experience of childbirth, that itself imposed a tumas leida on the isha. And the Brisa is teaching us a very interesting halacha. Let's see right. Leida yeveshta, if it's a dry leida, my matame b'fnim k'machutzika. How do we apply the concept of matame b'fnim k'machutz, which is generally said regarding re'iyas dam? How does that apply to just plainly giving birth without dam? And for the Gemara Kegoin, we are speaking about, for example, Shahoitzi Vlad, the child had taken his head out, his head had emerged chutz leproizer, outside of the corridor, meaning the rechem of the isha has two parts. There's the wide part, and then the rechem of the isha narrows down to an area called a proizer, which is considered like a corridor, and it extends straight out, and then after that comes the vaginal cavity. Now, if the Vlad had begun the childbirth experience, and poked his head outside of this corridor, he's considered as if he was born. And there are three halacha ramifications to this chiddush, and that is what the Brisa is teaching us. We're not speaking about dam, we're not speaking about riyah, we're speaking about a leida of an isha without dam, and the tumas leida comes as a result of this leida, and two other nafkaminas that the Gemara will mention soon. And as soon as the Vlad had emerged, even partially, he poked his head outside of the proizdar, she is already considered as if she had given birth, and that is what the Brisa means when the Brisa says a leida, a yeledes, is metamim b'fnim kivachutz, meaning even though the child is still inside, deep inside, he had merely exited the chamber, but he is still deep inside in the external chamber of the isha, in the cavity of the isha, in the vaginal cavity. Nevertheless, that is considered as if he was born. It is similar to the din of Rav Oishia. Rav Oishia is discussing a case where a midwife had inserted her hand and come into contact with a fetus that died. Now, the halacha is that if he was not born yet, he is still inside the rechem, it is not considered a leida and is not matame. However, as soon as he is moitzi roishai, he extends his head out of the proizdar, then he is considered as if he was yolud, as if he was born, and he can be matame. So the Chazal imposed a tumah on the midwife, gzeira. We are chayshish, we suspect perhaps that happened, that took place, that the roish of the dead fetus had extended his head outside of the proizdar and was matame the isha. And a similar case we have where there is an afkamina between this halacha of Haitzi Reish Chutz L'Proizdar is regarding the halacha of Bris Milah. V'chei ha'asahu da'asal kamei d'Rava. A fellow came in front of Rava. Amar Lehi, he asked him a question. Ma'u l'mimel b'Shabbata. Could we be moil? Could we make a milah on a baby that was born on Shabbos and the 8th day falls out on the following Shabbos? Is that mutter? Is that permitted? Amar Lehi Shabra Dami. Of course it is. It's a pretty simple question. Basad the after the man left. Amar Rava said, Salka da'itach. Can you think to say that who gaver l'yod, this man didn't know the shari that is permitted l'mimel b'Shabbata, that is permitted to be moil on Shabbos? That is a pretty obvious halacha which is universally known. It can't be. It's hard to believe that he was asking such a simple question. There must be some unusual circumstance involved here. Azal Basra, he went after him to find out. Amar he said to him, Emily, tell me please. Easy, my friend. Gufa de uvda. Tell me the facts of the case. Hechiava, how did it take place? What did you mean to ask? Amar Leah, she told him as follows. Shamas Vlad, I heard the child, the baby, the tzavis. He was crying, Apanyo de Mali Shabbata, before nightfall, Erev Shabbos. However, the actual birth only took place at Shabbat until Shabbos. My question was whether he's considered as if he was born on Shabbos, and therefore the Milah is the following Shabbos, or perhaps it is considered as if he was born on Friday, and therefore the Mila will take place 8 days later on Friday. So Rava says, aha, if that's the case, then I take it back. The Leida actually took place on Erev Shabbos. Why? Since you heard the crying, the sounds of the baby, it cannot be that he was still inside the Recha. It must be that he was Haitzi Roishai. He already extended his head outside of the Proisdar. Now, it's very interesting to note why, on what basis did Rava make this premise. And I see one of the Farshim says, because we know the Gemara teaches us that a ubar, b'me'ei imai, an unborn child, his peh, his mouth is sasam, is closed. He can't emit sounds. So the very fact that there was a sound coming from the baby, it was a riot. It was a evidential that there was a Leida, a partial Leida that took place. Amar Lei told him, "Hi, if so, if you heard sounds coming, it must be that he already emerged outside of the corridor, and therefore he was born actually on Erev Shabbos, and the Mila will take place the following Erev Shabbos. And of course, you cannot do the Mila on Shabbos because this is not the designated time. It is already Yom Tashiyah, is the 9th day. If you'll be Mal on Shabbos, it will be a Mila Shaloi Bizmana, outside of the designated time. You cannot be Machal Shabbos in such a case. So let's make a quick review of the previous shtickle Gemara. We had a Brisa which listed Niddah, Zava, and Yoledes. All of them have a similar halacha that they're Metame, Bifnim, Kibachutz. Niddah and Zava we understand. It means that if she sees Dam needs to get only until the external cavity, and that is already Metame the Isha. We've learned it from a pasuk of Biv Sarah. Even if the Dam is found inside her guf, that is already Metame the Isha. We had a problem with the last case of the Brisa, Yoledes. What are we speaking about? She saw Dam. Whether it was Bimei Niddah, whether it was Bimei Ziva, is already included in the previous cases of the Mishnah, of the Brisa. Why is it necessary to focus on a new case of Yoledes? What Chiddush, what extra halacha are we learning from there? So the Gemara brought down a Memra halacha that teaches us that a Yoledes who was tayvel from her Yemei Tumah, and there was Dam Nekar, was dislodged before going to the mikvah, but remained inside the guf of the Isha. And the conclusion of the Gemara was that it will be Metame the Isha as soon as it leaves the Isha. However, it is not a Tumas Roya. There is no Tumas Shiva as though she would be a Nida, but rather merely a Tumah Kala of Tumas Erev. She's tummy that day because she came to contact with a Dam tummy which had been Nekar, which had been discharged prior to the Tefillah, and therefore the Dam is tummy. And the Tefillah Chiddush is that the Tefillah of the Isha does not affect the Tahara on the Dam, since it was created before the Tefillah, and she is Tameh for coming into contact with that Dam. That is the Pshat in the Halacha. However, regarding the Pshat in the Brisa, we went on a totally different channel. The Brisa is teaching us a very interesting Halacha, that when does the Leida actually take place? When, as soon as the Roish, the head of the child, emerges from the corridor of the Rechem, that is considered already a Maisa Leida, regarding 3 halachas. Number 1, that the Isha is Tamei Tumas Leida from here on in. Number 2, if the fetus died, it is a uber that is mace, and somebody comes into contact with that uber that was already Haitzi Roisha, already his head emerged, the uber is Metame. And number 3, regarding Mila B'Shabbos, that we follow the stage of Haitzi Roisha to determine when the Leida takes place. If it happened on Erev Shabbos, that is considered the Yom HaLeida, and the Yom HaMila is the following Erev Shabbos. Zoch the Gemara weiter. Iboilu, Gemara is a shayla. Oisei makam shel Isha, the makam ha'erva of the Isha, the cavity, the vaginal cavity of the Isha, balua havi oibeis hastarim havi. Is it a concealed place? And we know the halacha that if a davar tamei comes into contact with a person in a concealed area, it is not metame the person. The person does not acquire tumah from that davar tamei. Or do we say that it is a balua? It is much more than just a beis hastarim. It is considered swallowed in the person. It is bottled to the person. It is nullified. It is kilu, as though it's non-existent, and it cannot be metame at all. Not only will only be metame b'maga, it can't transmit tumah even through masa. We know that there are certain Dvarim Tmeim, certain objects of Tumah, which are Matama person either through coming into contact, which is Maga, or carrying the Tumah, Masa, even if you didn't actually personally touch it, but you lifted it via something else. You carried it, that is Tumas Masa, and regarding Tumas Masa, there is no limitation of Beis Hastorim. Meaning that if there is a Davar Tameh, which is Matame B'Masa, which has the potential to transmit Tumah through carrying, even if it is situated in the Beis Hastorim of a person, it will still be Matame the person. The question remains, the Oisim Makam, the external cavity of a Isha, whether it is categorized as a Beis Hastorim and is only free of Tumas Maga, however, it still can be Matame B'Masa, or do we say that Makam is considered Balua, it is so internalized, and something there, which is there, is batal to the person and is not have the power to be Matame at all. L'may nafkamina, what is the nafkamina? What is the halachic ramification? Kulgain shatach v'lechaverta, her friend had inserted kazayis nevela, a shear of a kazayis of olive size of a nevela, which is matama b'maga and b'masa, ba'isa malkim into that area. As if you say balua havi, that it is as if it's swallowed. Tuma blua le matama, we know the halacha, the general rule that something a tuma blua which is swallowed is not matama at all. However, if you'll say beis astar mavi, that is merely a concealed area, it is not considered blua, but it is merely concealed, then true, nihi v'magloi matami. It's true that b'maga, by tumas maga, it will not receive, not admit tuma. However, b'maasa matami, it could still be matama the isha through carrying. Machlekes Abaye and Rav in this regard, Abaye Amma balua havi, it is considered swallowed in, it is batal. We don't even see the kazayis and nevela as if it doesn't exist at all. It is not matama the isha in any way whatsoever. Rava Amar, no, beis astar mavi. It is not tuma blua, it could still be matame b'masa, however b'maga it can't be matame because it is a beis hastarim. Amar Rava, how do I know this? How do I know to determine that the Oisem Makim is a beis hastarim? The Sami learned in the Brisa earlier that a isha is mishamish with an ish, and the zera of the ish enter the isha. Why is the isha tamei? Torah says the isha is tamei after tashmish. Why is that? Is it because she came into contact with the zera? It can't be. The beis hastarim, the Oisem Makim, the isha is beis hastarim. It can't receive tumah from the zara just merely by coming into contact. And the Brisa concludes that it must be exeras hakasav, a new chiddush of the pasuk, that the act, the experience of tashmish imposes a tumah on the isha regardless of coming or not coming into contact with a davar tamei. Back into the Gemara. Ella, why is the isha tamei after tashmish? Pnei shetumas beis hastorim hi, or tumas beis hastorim lematama. Ella sheexeras hakasafi. So you see very clear the Brisa coins the term of tumas beis hastorim regarding the Oisem Makim of the isha. So that supports my view that it is merely beis hastorim and not tuma blua. Abaye responded, Abaye, true, the Brisa does mention the word beis hastorim, but the Brisa is being a little bit overly generous, so to speak. It's covering all the bases. Chada v'oid ka'amar. The Brisa is basing it on two reasons, on one and another reason. Chada, first thing is tuma bluhi. The Oisem Makim of isha is tuma bluhi. So therefore, there's no tuma at all there. Va'oid afilu im timtzalaimi. Even if you venture to say, you won't agree with me to the extent that it's tuma blua, but you'll hold that it is tumas beis hastorim, still eina matama, it can't be matame. El shegzeres hakosafi. So true, the Brisa does use the word beis hastorim, but it is just an additional tam. The primary reason is that the Oisem Makim is actually tuma bluhi and not merely beis hastorim. So let's make a quick recap here. Machlekes Abaye and Rav regarding the Oisem Makim, the external cavity of the isha. Is it considered beis hastorim? That is the shita of Rava, and therefore it cannot receive tuma via maga. Abaye holds it is more than just beis hastorim. It is considered tuma blua, and anything in there doesn't exist. It can't even be matama isha b'masa. One more Gemara, very similar. Iboy lehu. The Gemara Shaila. Makam nivlas oiftar. We mentioned earlier that an individual eats a kazayis of a dead kosher bird. He is tamei and matame his clothing as well. Only b'shas, during the act, during the experience of achila, while the nivela is in his throat, during the swallowing, that's when he's matame. That's when he becomes tamei and matame his begadim. Now, the Gemara poses a question: is the throat of a person considered beis hastorim or considered a makam balua? Makam nivla seif Torah balua havi or beis hastorim havi? L'may nafkamina. What is the nafkamina? So it is the same as before. Kigoyin, for instance, shetachav lechavera, his friend had inserted kazayis nevela, a kazayis of a nevela, meaning of an animal, a dead animal, which is metami b'maga and b'masa, matoich into his mouth, straight into his throat. Why does the Gemara have to mention chaveroi? Because pashat, very simple. If a person does it to himself, he can come into contact and be metami b'maga just by touching, by handling it. Secondly, if it somehow lands anywhere else in his mouth, he will be metame b'masa as well, because he carried the tumah. So his friend poked the kazai straight into his throat. If that place is considered swallowed, considered balua, tumah blua la metame, anything that's found inside the makam blia is not metame at all, and the person will be free of any tumah. If it's considered merely a concealed place, nihi nami, true that b'magalei matami can't become matami by coming into contact, because there's a beis hastarim that is touching the tumah. However, b'masa matami, he can still become tamei because he is carrying the tumah. So it is very similar, word for word, to the Gemara earlier regarding the beis hasarim of the Isha. And guess what? With the same exact machlekes, with the same two manda omrim. Abaya omar belua havi, v'rava omar beis hastarim havi. Omar Abaya, minala. How do I know that this makom is considered a belua? The Sani we've learned in the Brayso. Yochad, I would think to say tehei nivlas behema metama b'gadim beis habliya. We discussed earlier that the halacha of nivlas oif tor, that is metama a person while he's eating, is strictly said related to a dead bird, but not a dead animal. So to Brayso, I would think to say, yeah, perhaps this halacha applies to a dead animal as well. That is metame begada, a person metame his clothing that he's wearing while he is swallowing the kazayis of the nevela of the animal. Talmud Lemer teaches us nevela utreifa lo yachal. He shouldn't eat the tama, but to become tame with it. So we darshan mi she'ein lo tuma el achilasa. Only something which emits tuma via being eaten, which is a nivlas oiftar, which has no other tuma except during the achila, there the Torah will impose a tumah of achila. However, yotza zu, by a dead animal, it has other tumas as well. It carries the whole list of potential tumas, maga and masa. So therefore, it will not have this special halacha of being matama person during his achila. Yotza zu, we exclude a nevela, a dead animal. Shematama koydem sheichlena. It can matama a person as well before he actually eats it through coming into contact with it, and therefore it is not included in this halacha. In fact, the Gemara, fine, we don't have a pasuk to teach us that a nivlas behema is matama b'shas achila. But however, perhaps we could derive it from the halacha of a nivlas iftar with a logical kavachomer, v'teisi kavachomer min nivlas iftar. Uma nivlas iftar madach, meaning, how could it be that a nevela of iftar, which actually has a leniency, she'ein lo tum b'chutz, it doesn't have a tumah b'chutz, an external tumah by coming into contact with it, as we mentioned earlier. Still in all, yesh lo tumah ifnim, it emits tumah internally by eating it. So it has a leniency of not being metame through contact. Still, we see that the Torah imposed a tumah of achila. Zu, nevela of a behema sheyesh lo tumah b'chutz, that carries with it, possesses a very stringent halacha of tumah. It has a tumah b'chutz. By coming into contact with it, it is matame a person. Of course, ein din. Certainly, yesh lo tumah ifnim, we will impose on it a tumah of eating. Omakros, the Torah has to teach us amiyat, an exclusion. Ba, only a nivlas oiftar, a dead bird, is matame ba'achila. Ba v'loi ba'acheres, and not by a nevela of a behema. If so, why does the Torah mention the word achila regarding the tumah of a nevela in the pasuk of the Torah mentions the word achila, the term achila, while describing the tumah coming from a nevelas behema. Why is it necessary? What is special about achila regarding a nevelas behema? Litain shir. The Torah is teaching us by using the word achila. The Torah is hinting to us that there is a certain amount required in order to become tamei b'maga or b'masa when coming into contact with an avelas behema. What is that shir? That is a shir achila. And we know the universal shir achila is a kazayis. Just like oichel. Ma'oichel b'kazayis. Just like the dini achila and kol HaTorah kula, the laws of eating are always connected with the shir kazayis. So too, coming into contact or carrying an avela will only be strictly said if the avela possesses a shir of kazayis. So in conclusion, we have two shilas in the Gemara, very similar Gemaras. One is regarding the oisim makom of an isha, one is regarding the beis habliya of a person, whether or not they are considered merely beis hastarim and would be exempt from tumas maga, however still carry tumas masa? Or do we say that makom is considered a makom balua? It is so internalized, so internal in the person, and therefore a tumah that is there is viewed as non-existent, that will not be matame the person at all. Abaye held that is a tumah blua. Rava says it is merely beis hastarim, and the Gemara concluded that the halacha of a nivlas iftar is strictly by a nevela of an oif and not by a nevela of a behema. A nevela behema, since it is matame b'maga b'masa, it does not possess this additional halacha of tumas gadol beis habliya. However, the Torah does mention the word achila with regard to nivlas behema to teach us that the shear of maga b'masa is because ice. One more shtickle Gemara. Amar Rava is going to mention to us a series of three halachas regarding the tumas makkah and beis hastarim. Amar Rava, sheretz b'koimta. If a person is carrying a sheretz in his fold, meaning, for instance, an armpit, a place which is considered a beis hastarim, concealed, he doesn't acquire tumah from the sheretz because it's beis hastarim. Nevela b'koimta, he is carrying a nevela, however, tamei, he is tamei. Why is that so? Sheretz b'koimta tahar. Why? Sheretz b'negia the matame. Sheretz can only be matame through negia, through coming into contact. Ubeis hastarim lav bar magu. Since it is in a concealed place, it cannot emit tumah to the person. However, nevela b'koimta tamei. If he's carrying a nevela, he is tamei. Why? Nehi is true b'maga lebim tamei. He cannot become tamei through maga. However, b'masa mi matame. The nevela, let's recall, is matame by two methods. Through maga and through masa. It's true beis hastarim cannot be considered a proper contact. It is not the usual way of coming into contact with something. Therefore, it is not matame the person. It doesn't transmit tumah to the person. However, let's remember he is also carrying the nevela, and if so, he acquires tumah from the nevela through tumas masa. One more halacha: sheretz b'koimta. A person has a sheretz in his fold. He enters, he brings that fold with the sheretz inside into the airspace of an earthenware tanner, which can acquire tumah through the airspace. The tanner gets the tumah of the sheretz, even though it is covered over by the person. Pshita, that is so simple. Why should it not be so? Ma'al would think to say, Torah states that when a davar tamei, a sheretz, for instance, falls into the airspace of a tanner, it is found toichai internally in the airspace of the tanner, is matame the tanner. However, if the davar tamei is found in a utensil, a kli, that the kli itself was lowered partially into the tanner, then it is considered toichai, is inside something else which is inside the tanner. Then it won't be matame the tanner. So I would think to say that a sheretz that inside the fold of a person is considered as if it is found inside a kli, inside a utensil, and cannot go ahead and spread into the avir hatana, into the airspace of a tanner. Kamash malan, and the Torah informs us, the Rava informs us that is not so. It is not considered as if it would be, as if the sheretz is contained in a separate container, even though it is hidden inside the beis hastarim of the person. That is only halacha strictly limited to the halacha of the person come into contact with his sheretz. If he is contacting it within via a beis hastarim, he does not acquire the tumah. But regarding the sheretz, if you view the sheretz is not contained in a kli, in a utensil, and therefore it is certainly going to be matame the tanner by entering the airspace of the earthenware tanner.